There are those facts that you hear and they help kind of grow your brain or really give you a good feeling, and you're very happy that you learned these things. Then there's this group of stories. What are some very creepy facts? Story 1. It is legal to publicly hang people in Texas, as well as paddle school kids, as long as you're a principal, but illegal to have an abortion, even if you and the child would perish if you went on too long in pregnancy. Also, apparently, a lot of people think Texas can secede from the U.S., even though the whole premise of when Texas was a lone country was that it was basically America, and people were ecstatic when the U.S. asked Texas to join. I also talked to a teacher who has seen a principal paddle a kid. Had to legally be there, and was a long time ago. The law was probably made after a principal had a bit of a kink for it. They basically just use a shortened oar with holes in it, so it could go as fast as possible. At that point, it definitely goes into assault, but do politicians care? No, they don't. Also, don't try to eat one of those cactuses that look like a bunch of green plates welded together without first skinning it with a knife large enough so you don't cut a finger or three due to having the knife be small, so you need to have your hand close. It is biological and strives off having randomness, so there could, possibly, I don't know, be a large spine or two. And don't pet the deer. If they were slightly larger, they would confront predators head-on more. And my mom lives out in the woods with a friend of hers. The deer out there are getting a little too comfy now that summer's rolling around. They'll actually take shade under the trees or actually even under the house late at night. The idea that they always run away when they see people is not exactly true. Sometimes they're known to actually stand up and square up like they're about to really start something. Story 2. I knew about the hearing fact through the Army, and kind of a messed up and funny story. We were doing CLS, Combat Lifesaver Training, and we had these high-speed dummies that breathed, blinked, and bled to get us accustomed to the symptoms, and my team was freaking out. I was keeping the airway open, and the dummy was bleeding horribly from a leg amputation. I knew that if they didn't get their stuff together, we would fail, and I fell back on my standard response to traumatic stuff, humor. So with a straight face, I looked at the dummy and said, "So good news, bud. You'll be able to get your boots half off after this." My team stared at me like I was a lunatic before they started laughing. Medic tried to fail me for being an unfeeling monster when the trainer told her that if he were in that dummy's position, he'd be laughing right along with us, and explained the hearing being the last sense to go before you perish. Still makes me grin to look back and have such a stupid memory. The hearing is the last thing to go? That reminds me of The Princess Bride at the end where, spoiler alert, Wesley threatens to disfigure the Count in battle but leaves his ears intact, just so that everyone can hear all the gasps and cries when they see that person. For a charming and funny movie, that's a pretty gruesome little part of it. Story 3. I remember that set of questions, but one thing kind of interesting about MJ. A good number of the kids who were said to have been touched came forward years later, saying they hadn't been touched, or that they were never allowed near his bedroom when he was attempting to sleep, that they had bunk rooms, etc. It's messed up because a lot of people, even those in the music industry, say he abused them. But we also have some cases of people claiming nothing happened. I mean, most likely that someone wanted to cash in on possible abuse and knew they could do it, and that they would get away with it. This is why we have issues with people claiming something is false as well. and why people tend to believe abuse victims in some cases if the person is famous. That's also one reason why I very much dislike people that claim abuse to get someone back for something, like dumping them, or just because they dislike them. Penn and Teller had an interesting take on this. They showed 2 different cookbooks that were supposedly based on the type of foods that Elvis liked. Each one claimed that a certain type of peanut butter sandwich was his favorite, but they both had very different recipes. At this point, we probably will never know the real truth about what happened with MJ. Or maybe we won't know until many years from now, when someone will finally set the record straight on exactly what his legacy was. Story 4. For non-U.S. Americans, Amber Alerts, as stated in the video, is a system that tries to gather immediate manpower and information in missing children's cases. That is, age, height, look of the child, abductor, car, area, and what else is known. As far as I know, it works as an app and automatically notifies you if you're near that area. The name does not come from the color. Well, technically it does, but from the name of a girl, Amber Hagerman. She was abducted and there was a mass mobilization with no result. After 4 days, her remains were found. As people did not necessarily know what she looked like or what car she was abducted with, that led to the Amber Alert. People criticize it for only helping in a small percentage of cases, most alerts being dubbed false alarms because a family member took the child without permission. But in my opinion, awareness and the fact that it exists is a good thing. Also, family members can be crazy and borderline criminals. Story 5. I got one for you. I don't know if this is true, but the movie The Exorcist is haunted. The cast was given bad luck, hurt, and even perished. The priest in the movie possibly actually perished on scene, and they didn't know it, like a spirit was haunting all of the cast members and directors. To add to it that I know is true is that it's based on an actual event that happened where an evil spirit possessed and manipulated a little boy. Saw it on a Ghost Adventures episode. And another one about the dolphins. There was a project that had dolphins be able to speak English. One of the workers, Margaret, was with a dolphin named Peter for a while. Then it turned, let's say, bad, as the both of them soon had a relationship and made love. Margaret was arrested because she did it with an animal, and Peter offed himself, drowning in the water because he couldn't be with her. Story 6. Fun fact 1. There's a currently active band, early 2023, using human bones as instruments in performances. They've had some issues in airports. Fun fact 2. There's a famous crocodile missing in Africa's rivers, location unknown, and the body hasn't been found. It's famous due to how big it is. It's so big, it's practically immune to regular firearms, as people have tried shooting at it with AK-47s and such from local militias with no effect. So bring your anti-tank gun. Fun fact 3. There's a supposedly haunted forest in Russia in the region of Novgorod, called the Forest of Meat. There was heavy fighting in the area in World War II, and many remains are still found today. Those searching for bodies have reported hearing various kinds of gunfire, although there's nothing to make those noises anywhere nearby. They've reported to hearing voices in Russian, German, and some other languages, with no one else nearby, as well as figures showing them where to dig to find a body. It seems like anybody that has a creepy fact doesn't have just one creepy fact. Most of these have someone sharing several. I guess it's just the saying, misery loves company. Also, why are these fun facts? Who finds it fun that there's a crocodile out there that's immune to gunfire? Story 7. My 2 cents on the one about supporting artists and other people who are known criminals is that a major contributing factor to it is actual guilt versus perceived guilt. In America, at least, it's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but every generation moves farther and farther away from that until we get to where we are now, where any and all accusations are immediately regarded as true in the court of public opinion. However, because of that gray area of accused and proven, we feel better about supporting some people over others. This is not the only contributing factor, as there are others who have been proven guilty, such as Polanski, and yet are still supported. Popularity and cultural significance are definitely factors, but I do believe it does explain why many are still supported despite their accusations, because, at the end of the day, they've been accused of a crime, not proven to have done it. Story 8. In case anyone's wondering the name of the plant that was censored in another story, I believe they're referring to the stinging tree, otherwise known as the gimpy gimpy, as well as the self-unaliving plant. The stingers can cause such intense pain that you'd experience such intense and long-lasting pain you would either beg someone to put you out of your misery or just take your own life to be free of the pain. The pain in question can last for weeks or even months, and it's said to be the most poisonous plant in Australia, if not the entire world. Contact with the plant will immediately be followed by a severe burning and stinging feeling at the point of contact, which increases over the next 20 to 30 minutes and will last from a few hours to several days before subsiding. During this time, the victim may get very little sleep because of the sheer agony they're experiencing. Story 9. Had a coworker whose fiancé was a recovering H substance addict and had been homeless for almost 3 years the year before they got together. He only got help because someone recognized him on the other side of the country and called his dad. He was in Arizona, grew up, and family was in Minnesota. As you may expect, he wasn't the most well-adjusted person in the world. After a fight, he stormed out and left his phone behind. He had no car or license, so he left on foot. He didn't show up at work the next morning. He would walk, and none of their mutual friends had seen or heard from him. Coworker was worried sick about him, but kept citing the "can't make a report until he's been gone 48 hours. It took me way too long to convince her to call in and report him missing. He did show up later that day, thankfully. Yeah, not sure where that 48 hours comes from. I thought it was more along the lines of the first 48 hours are the most crucial to report someone's missing. I think some people assume you can't report until 48 hours to avoid people doing pranks on the police or other people. And that's unfortunate because it affects the families and the people that have actually gone missing. Story 10. Fun fact. There's a species of mushroom that releases a spore that, when inhaled, ants would become possessed by it. They would then be controlled by the fungus to find a suitable area to grow. Once they reached a suitable area, the fungus would grow from the ant while it's alive. The creepy part is that the ant is fully alive and fully conscious during the process, but they have no control over their own body. The fungus is actually what caused the breakout in the game The Last of Us, only a modified version that affects people. So just know that in The Last of Us, all those zombies, that person is still conscious, and they had to witness as they gored their families and couldn't stop themselves. The fungus is called cordyceps. Story 11. The tongue-eating parasite is called the Simathoa exigua, or tongue-eating louse. And for more aquatic-dwelling nightmare fuel, there's the kangaroo, a tiny species of parasitic catfish native to the Amazon River. They swim into a fish's gills, extend their tiny spikes all over their bodies to lodge themselves in place, and feed on the fish's blood. But the disturbing part is a result of how they find a host. They can detect urea in the water, urea being a chemical found in urine, which a fish excretes out their gills. But if a person, usually a man, pees in the water, well, let's just say it's not a fun time. And the little mongrels don't want to leave once they've set up shop. The only way to remove a lodged kangaroo is with surgery. Story 12. Fish parasite replacing the tongue is legit. Caught a darkie, a dark gray fish with black stripes that hangs around seaweed so it's dark and hard to see in the water. Got it back on the jetty and began to clean it up. Noticed its mouth was still moving, which was odd considering I'd hit it with a spear through the brain. Opened the mouth to peek inside, and the only thing I could describe it was like looking at a tiny alien. Just a little khaki-colored crustacean-looking beetle thing where its tongue was supposed to be. So damn freaky. Despite Googling it and learning all about the sea exigua and the fish still being edible, was still really weird and gave up eating fish for a while. I think you'd be safe if you just don't eat the tongue. Who eats fish tongue anyway? Cow tongue is already weird enough. I've never tried cow tongue. But fish tongue? I don't think there's that much of a demand for it. Story 13. Fun fact about Valentine's Day. I know that it's April, but I want to share this. Women used to be sold at an auction and were forced to stay with the man all day. Also, dogs and goats were skinned, and the women were then beaten with the hides. Fun fact about vampires. They were often just people who were buried alive and were able to get out. Fun fact about witch trials. Women used to go on trials for having their periods, as it was known as bleeding the evil out. Fun fact about the old biology of women. If a woman didn't give birth, the uterus would wander around the body and eventually terminate her. Story 14. When I had my first panic attack and Googled panic attack to see if that was indeed what was happening, I was actually so relieved to find that sense of impending doom was an official symptom that it ended the panic attack. It makes sense, considering how much clinical anxiety comes from being stuck in a feedback loop of being anxious about your anxiety. Seeing that it's a symptom, and thus not only was no doom actually impending, but also that it was a normal, albeit unhealthy feeling, took a weight off my shoulders.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 15. As someone who owns dubia roaches as food for my bearded dragon, I can confirm that they don't like to be touched. They also don't like being covered in the vitamin powder I use when I feed them, and will have it cleaned off themselves within a day if they survive. They can also be very surprisingly picky eaters. It's a damn pain. I have never been bitten by them, and they're more interested in getting away from me, but the spurs on their legs are very sharp for a bug. Oh no! The roach doesn't like to be touched? How tragic! I'm not sure the world at large is all that keen on wanting to pet roaches all day. Not when there's cats and dogs around. Story 16. People put way too much energy into who was having intimacy with whom and how old they were 50 years ago. Most of those famous rock stars were barely of age themselves. Hell, most of my grandparents were married off as teenagers. It was a different time. Most of us were nowhere near being alive, so we couldn't possibly understand. I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying I'd much rather worry about current socio-political issues than judge a bunch of dead or half-dead rock stars. Story 17. Dendrocnine moroides, commonly known in Australia as the stinging tree or stinging bush, Queensland stinger or gimpy gimpy, is a plant in the nettle family Urticaceae found in rainforest areas of Malaysia and Australia. It's notorious for its extremely painful and long-lasting sting. The pain never stops. It can reemerge at any time, and it's the worst pain you'll ever experience. People have committed self-isekai to not feel the pain when they accidentally used it as toilet paper. Story 18. If criminals have faced punishment and not run away from it, I believe they deserve the benefit of the doubt about their rehabilitation. Prison was made to rehabilitate criminals, so let's help them be rehabilitated instead of just hating them forever. Also, people who work for something should get what they work for, so if they produce movies, music, and you use or enjoy, they should get the payment that they deserve. I think some might take issue with that stance about prison, especially the for-profit prisons. I saw a story recently about a prison that was threatening to close unless the local police department filled the vacated spaces in the prison. I really don't believe that profits should be a part of a prison system. It should be a public service. Story 19. Doctors where I live give typed prescriptions. I had to see a different doctor for a refill, and when I brought the script to the pharmacy, the pharmacist is the one who caught that she prescribed me the wrong form of the pill. She had actually prescribed a near-identical but different chemical, so the pharmacist took care of it for me. It was pretty cool of him. Story 20. Creepy fact. Finally, a creepy one. John Hinckley Jr. and Charles Manson were also poets. The Beach Boys once took a Manson poem and set it to music. Devo once took one of Hinckley's poems and set it to music. Devo's song is called I Desire and is based on a poem Hinckley wrote just before his failed assassination attempt. I can't remember the Beach Boys' song name. Story 21. The tree that they were talking about has many names. Stinging bush, stinging tree, gimpy gimpy, and the pain does not subside because the needles inside of it are silicone-based, and the body cannot break them down. And the scariest part is that the natives describe the pain as being burned by acid and electrocuted at the same time. Story 22. With Polanski, the thing that makes the matter more complicated is at some point there was a suspicion that the girl or her mother lied. I'm actually not sure how all of this turned out to be, but it isn't so explicit that people who still like him are like, I am supporting somebody who I know for sure assaulted a girl. Story 23. Taking another person's life, regardless of the probability of being caught, is a very bad idea. Not only does it affect the family of the victim deeply, it also destroys you mentally. No matter what someone may say, you're never the same, nor do you look at humans the same after you commit termination. Story 24. Music is much easier to separate in comparison to movies, for example, where you're looking at the person constantly when it comes to that. Also, MJ was never proven to be a predator, and there are a multitude of cases that were dropped for various reasons, not including the kids lying about it. Story 25. I learned to always lock the door when a guy walked into our house from the bar down the street and sat down to watch TV with me. I went to talk to my brother, and he and his friends made the guy leave. Also, I take an anti-malaria, not sure how many kinds there are, substance twice a day for a disease I have. Story 26. Fun fact, a monster truck accident in Chihuahua, Mexico is when a monster truck lost control of his truck and terminated 9 people and 4 children, and the cops smelled alcohol on his breath, but they blamed the people for being so close, and the guy only got 5 years for the reckless homicide of 9. Story 27. Similar to malaria, dengue fever is similar. My dad got it doing MSF work, and it would emerge every so often and wreak havoc up to and including the whites of his eyes turning blood red. It contributed to his perishing, causing him a hemorrhagic fever version of the virus which terminated him. Story 28. There is a point where you can literally think yourself to death. I know because I can do it. Basically, if I completely unfilter my thought process, the rate of thought accelerates, requiring more oxygen and more blood by proxy. Eventually, the blood pressure hits the point of an aneurysm. Yeah, not fun. Story 29. 40% chance of justice for terminating? That's why the very last thing you do is use your fingerprints to scratch at the culprit and grab at their hair for DNA samples. Unless they plan to stick around and remove each trace, they're not going to get away with it forever. Story 30. Late puppeteer Carol Spinney was almost on the Challenger. The reason he wasn't was because they couldn't fit the Big Bird costume on the shuttle. Sally Ride ended up going in his place. Imagine watching Big Bird perish on national television. That one's kind of creepy, especially when you consider that Sesame Street was very bold in having an episode where they actually dealt with the character of Mr. Hooper expiring. The actor that played Mr. Hooper, Will Lee, had actually perished. The creators and writers of the show decided that they wouldn't say anything like, "Oh, Mr. Hooper moved away." They actually dealt with the topic of termination. It would have been sad if Carol Spinney was on that shuttle. Story 31. There was a farmer who had a heart attack while feeding his pigs. They ate him. The family found out because they saw the clothes he was wearing ripped apart in the pig pen, and his dentures. Story 32. I would suggest people have a look at Razorfist's video series on the Michael Jackson allegations. It's actually pretty informative about what actually occurred and how bunk a lot of the accusations were towards him. Story 33. I've heard of necropants before. And the spider that gives a painful boner before expiration is the Brazilian wandering spider. The plant that causes excruciating pain is the gimpy gimpy. It's in Australia because of course it is. Story 34. The blue-ringed octopus doesn't sting you. No octopus does. Its venom comes from its itty-bitty tiny little mouth, and you won't even feel it. Ergo, most bites are fatal. Yay! More nightmare fuel for you. You're welcome. Story 35. Note to self. When I'm going to expire, I need to make sure to climb Mount Everest and become a marker by expiring in a position where my arm is pointing to the right direction. I shall be known as the human arrow marker. Story 36. Stonefish are also really hard to see. So hard to see, my cousin kicked one thinking it was a rock. Also, you can inactivate the venom by putting hot water on it, so it's normal for people to pee on the affected area. Story 37. I forgot the name of it, but there's a plant that if you touch it, the pain is said to be so unbearable that people will try to cut off where it was touched, or even go as far as to unalive themselves just to get rid of the pain. Story 38. The sting of the irukandji jellyfish can also cause a feeling of impending doom. Also, the irukandji jellyfish is tiny, like half a centimeter long, and it's clear. Also, it lives off the coast of Australia. Story 39. The tree that causes unending pain is called the gimpy gimpy tree, nicknamed the self-unaliving plant, because there's records of people stung by it taking their own lives due to the pain. Story 40. My father-in-law contracted malaria in the 1950s in the Korean War. His last attack was in the early 1980s, and all his teeth fell out over a short period of time, months. Story 41. The name of the Australian tree that truly ruins your life is called the gimpy gimpy tree. I'm sure I've butchered the spelling, but I guess it may get past the censor bot. It's a really nasty tree. Story 42. Sponges feed in the sunlight aerobically and anaerobically feed within the moonlight, so they will try to consume other sponges or algae as well as plankton. Story 43. Narcissists are usually successful. Sociopaths are usually successful. Narcissistic sociopaths are the most dangerous and frequently the richest people alive. Story 44. Disney didn't use real skeletons in Pirates of the Caribbean because they couldn't make them realistic. They did it because real skeletons were cheaper than artificial at the time. Story 45. When I was young, I heard an author of a book series I liked was accused of being a child pervert, and I immediately threw out his books. I just couldn't. Story 46. Cannibalism is technically legal in the U.S. However, the majority of methods of acquiring human meat are illegal, and the consumption legally isn't. Story 47. In America, there's also a 60% chance to get away with bank robbery, as long as you're not too greedy and cover your appearance up well.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.